Okay, we're into an episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today, I have a really cool little comparo for you guys from Rolex. And thanks to our friends at Belmont Watches, I'm able to do a little bit of comparative. Unfortunately, this piece has already sold, so I thought, why not make this a little bit more fun? And before shipping it off, do a quick comparison to one of its micro brand contemporaries from the brand Traska. Now, Rolex was originally founded by Hans Wilsdorf back in 1905 and officially registered as the brand name Rolex by 1908. They are originally out of London, England, where Rolex would actually eventually be headquartered out of Geneva in Switzerland from 1920 and on. This is the Oyster Perpetual 39, and it is in that beautiful white dial configuration, which is actually more of a pale silver if you ever get one in the metal. It was actually this particular Polar Explorer-like color combination was released in 2018 and discontinued shortly after in 2020, and it was often regarded as the perfect everyday do-it-all luxury watch by many enthusiasts. You can actually buy this, well, you could have, but somebody already did buy this particular unit for $8,550 pre-owned from Belmont Watches in San Diego. Now, I'll be actually comparing it with this beautiful Traska Commuter here. And a little bit about this brand is they were founded by John Mack in 2018 and are headquartered out of Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And of course, these watches do feature Asian production. This is the Commuter 38 in the Arctic white dial, and it's really meant to just be an all-around sports watch designed to be the perfect companion for any occasion. You can actually pick these up right now, as long as they're still in stock, for $635 direct. And I think they're very, very comparable in a lot of great ways. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, another huge shout out to Belmont Watches, of course, for letting this piece in. And honestly, this Rolex has been a long time grail for me. And it's actually its lack of availability, and also, of course, the fact that it is quite high up within the pricing tiers of, at least for my particular budget in terms of what I like to wear, has really, unfortunately, kept it out of my watch box. But the idea of it has actually fueled a lot of other likes and watches that I wear quite often, to include this beautiful Traska here. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, before we even get into some of the specs and the comparables, there are certain things that just have to be said. Elephant in the room. Although Rolex is, completely mass produced, and, does lack a lot of hand finishing, you would say that is comparable to other luxury manufacturers. The facts are, they do execute at extremely high levels of quality in terms of their tolerances and fit and finish. Now, it's not going to be the most complex fit and finish. There's not going to be a level of hand finishing there. There's going to be less artisanship and artistry, but I would say it's comparable to something like, let's say, a Porsche. Now, although a Porsche 911 is not meant to be necessarily luxurious, it's a sports car because of the level of tolerances. Even though it is not necessarily very glamorous or very showy, it is still very clearly a quality piece of, product. Now, the same can be said for Rolex. The tolerances here are not going to be that close, right? If you can see right now, the space in between the lugs, just the seams where things meet on the bracelet, they're not necessarily that comparable. And for many, it doesn't really matter. These are executed to a level to where the normal casual buyer won't even be able to appreciate it. They'll see something like this and say that is just as good to my eye. But hey, as somebody who's reviewing and comparing these pieces more with a level of objectivity, I do have to throw that out there that clearly the Rolex is a finer finished piece. It doesn't have, let's say, the hard coating that the Traska has. It doesn't have the little details in terms of like the handset, the extra level of, flair that they've done in terms of the multi finishing there. It's definitely a lot more simple. The Rolex text even is printed versus the Traska, but you can see that the Rolex printing and text is going to be just that much sharper. Also, the dial itself is more of a pale opaline silver, something similar that you would see, let's say, on the Monta Noble, whereas here this Traska is going to be an actual pure white enamel. So those are just some of the kind of jump out differences. But I will say, having these right next to each other, you can see there are actually quite a few differences, apart from just the general. I know when I reviewed this, a lot of people automatically thought of the Oyster Perpetual. It's a shame that they no longer have this color combination because, again, this is kind of watch perfection. So any dings against this $600 Traska, you can't be hypercritical by comparison. But I will say there's things that the Traska did that I like having drilled lugs. I do like that, especially for Rolex with how tight these tolerances are. Getting this end link switched in and out is not going to be a very easy or intuitive task. Now, also, you're going to see the female end link there, which means it's going to drape just that much nicer when you have it held. Versus here, although it does drape very nice because of the execution on this male end link. Look at the way that it just barely is proud of the actual lines of the case, and it swoops down to follow. That is how you do it. That is just a beautifully executed male end link that doesn't really, again, although it's not necessarily the style that folks like, the way that it's executed actually makes it very nice. You can see even the thoughtfulness in terms of proportion to where that center link is about the same size visually. And a lot of times you're going to see from other manufacturers, the center link looks very elongated compared to the links. Here it is definitely very well proportioned. So this is a gorgeous piece. But okay, now let's get into some of the details now that all of that just kind of intro is out of the way. Of course, now I'm waiting for my camera to be able to focus. There we go. All right, so you're going to have 38.9 millimeters in diameter versus 38.5. You're also going to get 11.2 millimeters thick versus 10.6, so slightly thinner, and you can see a lot of that has to do with that very flat case back versus the more of the bubble back style traditional to Rolex. Now, lug to lug, in terms of that length, also a little bit of a difference, 47.3 versus 45.7. So in terms of wear profiles, the Traska is going to be more wearable across more wrists. Of course, that does have to take into account as well, what if you have a larger wrist, and the Rolex is going to be essentially a better fit. I do have a larger wrist, and I guess you could say that it probably does have a bit of a better fit for my wrist, depending. I don't know. We'll leave that to you when we get there. But to compare some more of the things here, of course, the in-house Rolex caliber 3132 48-hour power reserve 4 hertz sweep. So in terms of that beat rate, it's going to be 28,800 vibrations per hour. But this is a superlative chronometer that's going to be at a level of plus or minus 2 seconds per day accuracy versus the Traska. Even though they do regulate these or adjust them in about 4 positions, they're not promising anywhere near that. It's going to be a lot closer to just your average Miyota, because this does have a Miyota 9039, which is a no date movement, which is great. So you're going to not have a ghost position or anything like that. Also has a 48-hour power reserve and beats at 4 hertz with a 28,800 vibration per hour beat rate. So actually pretty comparable. Of course, the main difference being that you're getting an in-house movement versus an off-the-shelf movement with the Traska, and that is of course one of the economies that do help the price be a lot cheaper in terms of developing and everything like that. Both have 20 millimeter lug widths and both taper down. Here you're going to see a bit of a more dramatic taper from 20 down to about 15.3 versus from 20 to about 16, and then you're having an 18 millimeter 18.2 millimeter clasp versus a 17.6 millimeter clasp from the Rolex. So slightly more refined. Also, you're going to notice slightly shorter links, and you're getting a half link included versus here full size links. And you're going to get, in terms of the clasp, it's just going to be friction, but this does have this really cool oyster clasp style. It does have 3 internal micro adjust positions, which you would actually move from here, where you can't see the holes through. So it does have that kind of clean, very shaved, smooth exterior, versus here you're going to get a push button clasp, which is very, very nice. But by comparison, might appear slightly clunkier. And then, of course, you're going to see the exposed screws, but you do get a nice internal toolless micro adjust here. So you push and you release, something that you're not going to get from the Rolex, right? And that's kind of on purpose, because Rolex likes to kind of, and they kind of have to really separate their lines in terms of, which technologies are going to be available on which, just so there's a little bit of brand diversity. The nice thing about micro brands is they really just want to, put in every single feature that you want. But with all that said, let's actually get these pieces on wrist and see how they wear. Ooh, okay, let's start with the Rolex. My goodness, guys, it's beautiful on wrist. Really absolutely flawless, just gorgeous on my 7.5 inch wrist. Of course, I do have a quite round wrist, so it's not super flat or anything like that, but if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, you're going to notice that you're going to have a bit of perspective distortion, so it might feel just slightly larger than it does. Versus if I were to just lay my wrist nice and flat and then just tighten up the frame here, so you guys can get a detailed look, but just keeping a bit of a truer aspect ratio of how this may lay on your own wrist. And this is absolute perfection, guys. My gosh, I'm loving this. And again, this has been a long time grail for me, and hopefully I'll be able to get to that level up one day to where something like this could be a reality for me. But my gosh, this is absolutely gorgeous. Now we compare that to this Traska. I think this looks really, really good. Fits really nicely. Again, it does have a slightly shorter lug to lug. It even has a design in terms of that lug end link to where it is going to drape just a little bit nicer and have a little bit more flexibility in terms of where I do like that bezel finish there with the chamfer. Again, they've done things to where it's just a little bit, they're trying a little bit harder, and they have to, right? They don't have hundreds of years of horological significance and hype around the brand to draw you in. They have to do certain things, and that is what I can appreciate. Like, you see this little bevel that comes off, even though it is a polished case side, there's still that little bevel that comes up and just adds a little bit of flair. Also, you get that nice bevel there coming off of that beautiful brushing on the bezel, versus here it's going to be a little bit more sedate by comparison. You're going to see there just a clean lug, no large rolling over bevel. It has a small of course, little transition that is very sharp, very nice. You can see the that beautiful bezel is reflecting quite nicely, fully polished and glossy. But at the end of the day, this 904 oyster steel isn't going to be quite as resilient to scratches as something like this, because we do have that hardened 1200 Vickers coating on there, which is very, very useful, especially in keeping a watch looking really good. Oh man, so nice. But with all that said, let's actually get these pieces off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Hey, as you can see there, loom wise, you're going to be getting that Rolex, I believe it's Chromolite, versus the more standard BGW9 from the Traska. You're getting a bit of a green hue versus a bit of a blue hue, and I have to say they're actually quite comparable. Of course, Rolex isn't necessarily known for, their lume being ultra potent. And in these types of everyday kind of dressy do-it-all watches, you don't really necessarily need that. One thing I always like to work in is a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. Maybe include a bit of harsh lighting, which typically could expose any types of production defects. But all you're going to see here is just a really well done and well executed pair. You can also notice, in terms of the fineness of the brushing, look at how uniform the light shines over the brushing on the Rolex case, guys. Ever so slightly. Not to say that what we have here on the Traska is, any less clean and well executed and serviceable for that matter, but there's just a higher level there that you're going to notice when you really get into those details. Now, some things that they also have in common is screw down crowns, 100 meters of water resistance. So these are, again, really perfect everyday companions, just on very different spectrums, or just the ends of the same spectrum, in terms of, hey, one is really meant to be a quite luxurious piece, and the other is meant to be just, luxurious in terms of the additional value that it's adding. And they're doing a lot of extra things that a lot of other folks in that $600 range aren't necessarily doing, in terms of complexity and really working for your dollar by adding all of those fine little details, down from the handset to just the level of crispness there. Again, not necessarily comparable to an all-out luxury timepiece, although, Rolex, of course, was born, in terms of their history, was born from tool watches, and really making the term Swiss made into kind of the archetype that it is today, right? You can't necessarily deny either that they, again, to the level of tolerance and fit and finish here is going to be, again, still executed to quite a luxury level. Apart from the hype, apart from the desirability and all the things that are surrounding it, it is a very high quality product that you get in hand, and it has a certain weight, a certain tightness, a certain just level of execution that really just screams quality. Now, in terms of closing thoughts here, guys, these are both great watches. Of course, the Rolex it should be better at the price point, being more than 10 times more expensive. But man, I mean, technically, when this watch first came out, it was probably right around 10,000 or 10 times more expensive, right? A $6,000 watch versus a $600 watch. Of course, now the Rolex is worth more due to its discontinuation and just, the hype around the Rolex brand and the desirability there. But is it 10 times better of a three-hand 100-meter water resistant everyday do-it-all watch? No, I mean, it's not 10 times, better. Is it 10 times more valuable? Absolutely. And, you can't really argue that. That is just the state of the market. It's more than 10 times more valuable. But I think, again, for those of you that aren't necessarily chasing down heritage, that aren't necessarily looking for, ultra tight tolerances, right? Like, yes, there's the example of some very nice German cars, let's say, like a really well been put together Audi or a, or a Porsche. But some people are okay with a nice Toyota Supra, right? Or a Nissan Z. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not going to be quite to that same level. When you close the door, you're not going to have such a secure thud, right? Because the tolerances aren't going to be quite as tight. But again, it's really up to that personal buyer. So some things are so nice that some people won't appreciate them, and some things are also so value oriented that you can't help but appreciate it, right? When you have something with a tall spec sheet, you get excited, and the Traska does just that. It has a very nice tall spec sheet, but it has an aesthetic that I think also crosses over. It's really well balanced. And if you hold it side by side here, there's actually quite a few differences. There's things, of course, they did, like the Rolex OP, but there's a lot of things that they did differently. So this isn't like, hey, they just recreated it and then slapped a different logo on there. This is a different watch from the ground up. Yes, it's going to ultimately end up in a very similar range and a similar type of watch. But I have to say, I'm just really impressed with both. And the Traska, of course, is going to be getting wrist time because I don't own the Rolex. But whoever did purchase this, you're one lucky enthusiast, because this thing is gorgeous. And again, very much kind of grail worthy in that reverse halo effect of, hey, Oyster Perpetual is supposed to be kind of the entry into Rolex, sports watches. And man, this is just a real masterpiece and a master class in restraint, in refinement. And again, it just draws me back to, car parallel on 911, right? Might not be the most exciting silhouette, but man, do they just do it right over, years and years and years of iterations and improvements. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do hit a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.